Jim, when you knew you were going to use the tennis racket during a match, or as part of an angle, did you ever load the racket in order to not hurt someone too badly, or make the racket shot sound better? I'm remembering in Ring of Honor when you turned heel on Samoa Joe in 2003, when you hit him on the back with the racket, it sounded like a shotgun going off.
No, and I attribute that to the perfect shape of Samoa Joe's back and the fact that he's a free perspirer. Here's the sweat and the contour are the mitigating factors in a perfect racket shot. Perfect meaning sounding like a fucking AK-47. And Joe and Animal, Road Warrior Animal was another guy. His back was so broad and it's like a perfect chop. And if you're wet, then it just magnifies the effects. So and then of course the acoustics in the arena. I mean, the big arena, sometimes a shot might get lost a little bit, but if the acoustics are good, it might ring out through the entire room. And little National Guard armories can sometimes just sound ridiculous because it echoes so well. As you can see, I put way too much thought into this in the past. And I never actually, the only time I ever loaded the racket was when I figured we were going to have trouble with the fans, not the boys, obviously. I didn't want to load the racket in any way to hit the boys, but there was that one time that those worlds collided. Tulsa, Oklahoma in Mid-South Wrestling was our worst town, most violent town. We've talked about, and I won't, for those of you who've been listening to the programs past few weeks, we've told a couple stories, but the violence and the riots in Tulsa and the internal affairs, police investigating the brutality, etc. The point is, we knew when we went to the ring in Tulsa, we were probably going to have some fucking trouble in the Midnight Express match. So that's when I loaded it with the horseshoe that they threw at me in Tulsa and that landed over my head. So I figured it was good luck. So I have it to this day in my suit bag, but I'd put the horseshoe in, which gave it a lot of weight. And I would duct tape that along with a dog choker chain around the edge of the racket and then put the cover back on. That way, if I hit somebody flat or with the edge, they were going to realize it, which was going to, if I had a dozen people around me that I needed to get through, I needed something that would make an impression fairly quickly. So that was it. So one night I'm at the ring with this racket. And when we had it like that, generally the thing was to draw back and do a gut shot with the stem of it or hit somebody, with like a pushing motion in the gut or even to the throat or something like that, but not a haul off Paul Bunyan swing whack, because then it's going to hurt the fuck out of you because now it weighs 10 pounds instead of being a lightweight tennis racket, right? Well, we were with the rock and roll. And Dennis had Ricky down, imagine that, in the ring and was just kicking the shit out of him. And Ricky was selling. And here comes Robert in to try to do something and Bobby and the referee goes with them. And Dennis calls for the racket. So I toss the racket in thinking he's going to jab Ricky in the ribs, right? Since it's loaded with a horseshoe and a dog chain and etc. Dennis's adrenaline is flowing so well that he doesn't realize it's loaded. He can't feel how heavy it is. And as Ricky is on his hands and knees, Dennis draws back over his head and starts a flat swing to Ricky's back. And I'm screaming, Dennis, no! And right as I say that, he whacked Ricky. And my God, air shot out of his mouth, shit shot out of his ass, lightning shot out of his dick. The fucking expression on his face as he looked up at me was like, my God, we've always been friends. Why? And then Dennis threw it back at me and I caught it. So, all right. So after Ricky regained his senses and continued the match, we did whatever we were going to do. We went back and I asked Dennis, he said, shit. He said, I didn't feel it. I was fucking, yes, my God. That is the hardest I've ever seen somebody hit with a racket, and when it was loaded to the gills. So sometimes, these things happen.
You didn't have the racket until you went to Mid-South, where it was obviously a territory you needed a weapon to go.
Yeah, no, that's why I got it. Because the boys mentioned to me, what do you need to carry something? Because I mean, Jimmy Hart had already had a cane in Memphis, and I was the kind of, second in command stooge there. And before that, when I was managing Adrian or my own guys, I would come up with standard manager stuff like powder out of the pocket or throw somebody a chain, but I didn't have a gimmick per se. And, when we went down there, they said, you need some reach on these people or you're going to have a lot of trouble.
Well, when you first start using the racket, like how long did it take you to feel like you mastered what it can do? We talk about that shot to the back and the loud pop it would give. Do you remember the first time you did that? Do you remember you realized, that this is exactly how it works? Did you have to fool around with the tennis racket in advance of going out there?
Oh, yes, because at first, and if you go back and watch some early Mid-South, I was trying to work the racket. And the whole reason why the racket works is because you do hit someone as hard as you can with it, but flat, and it's a tennis racket, right? So it makes a noise, but at the same time, it's not going. Now, having said that, in unauthorized hands, if you go for a head shot, you got to make sure that the head lands in between the framework on the strings, because if you don't and you hit somebody that hard, which you have to also to make it look good, if you hit somebody that hard with the frame, it's going to bust them open. As Dick Murdoch did, he hauled off and hit Bubba, the greatest guy working with gimmicks in the world, Dick Murdoch. But he'd never hit somebody with a tennis racket before. He hit Bubba in Greensboro and busted his eyelid open from one side of his eye to the other with that frame, because it's a whole different thing. Anyway, I would try to work the racket or hit the guy over the shoulder with kind of like where the curve is. And so the first ones kind of looked like shit. And then I realized, wait a minute, I can just unload on this if I do it in the right place or in the right way. And that helped me greatly. And then one night, Magnum TA, I think that's why he grows the beard that he wears to this day, because we had him down in Baton Rouge, and I had the racket by my left hand in the stem and the right hand on top, and jumped up and dropped down on my knees and was going to hit him in the chest. But one of the boys kicked him, I believe, and he kind of sit up a little bit. You moved, kid. And I hit him in the chin, busted his chin wide open. And he's basically like, fuck. And so he always says he still has that scar under there somewhere. But after a while, the different little tricks and things where I could take it and haul off and put the butt of it into somebody's throat and they could still speak afterwards. Imagine that. Or, the different ways that we used it or used it on people or whatever, they kind of developed.
Did you have a specific type of racket you preferred using? And also, were you ever recognized in a sporting goods store when purchasing the racket?
Yes and yes. And the answer was any racket that I could get that had a nice, tight vinyl cover that helped make the noise in Walmart or Kmart or a sporting goods store. And yes, I was recognized sometimes, but it's Jim Cornette buying a tennis racket, so it's believable. And the thing now is, if you go and look, they do not make, or at least I can't find them. They used to sell them in Walmart. They sell them in sporting goods stores or everywhere. The rackets with just the zip-on vinyl cover for just the racket without a carrying strap, and it covers the whole stem and everything. You can hardly find those anymore. It's gone out of fashion. My whole gimmick would have been different if this was 30 years ago.
You should have bought them in bulk.
Well, and that's the thing, goddamn. I used to throw them away by the dozens when they would, especially after a run with the Road Warriors. Those guys were so big, my racket would be all bent up, and nobody wanted them in those days. And I just toss them. Now, over the past few years, I've pretty much sold all the extra rackets I have, except 2 extra ones I've got in the closet and a few up on my office wall. And otherwise, I could have made a fortune on all those rackets I threw away.
How many, if you had to guess a number of how many rackets from Mid-South until the last time you picked up a racket you went through, how many would it be?
Oh, good God. If at least from then 1984 through 1995 in Smoky Mountain, I would go through easily, 4 or 5, more than that, 4 or 5 a year in Smoky Mountain, and probably 1 a month or more in the days where we worked every day for Crockett.
Wow. And there's no way the guy working in Walmart had anyone believe him when he went home and said, "You're not going to believe it. I sold a tennis racket to Jim Cornette today." No,
Yeah, no, they knew he was a lying sack of shit.